fabulously excited about stress. Right. So I know that's a weird thing to say, but it really speaks to that inner geeky science girl who in middle school thought chemistry was fascinating. And so the chemical reaction that happens in the body when we're stressed is fascinating to me. And I know we're going to talk, some of the other speakers are going to talk about that interplay between stress and physical health. But I'm also a little science geeky when it comes to the information that I share with audiences. For the last decade, well, more than a decade, I've been serving busy people, encouraging them to pay attention to their heart health. And I needed to do some research to make sure that I was giving the right information, that I wasn't giving things that were inappropriate. And as I did that, I often was asked to talk about work-life balance. And I think when we talk about happiness, this is often where we go, work-life balance, this teeter-totter between work and life. And I would do that because, of course, stress is a big part of heart health. But if I was honest, I felt like a hypocrite because I would stand there and give all of these great strategies to get more balance in your life, when if truth be told, my life was an inch away from chaos at any given moment. We were talking about kids this morning, right? So I would get everything sort of figured out, like I have balance. And then something else would come along. A kid would get sick, my mother-in-law would get ill, something would come along and poof, I'm out of balance again. And so I thought there must be a way of getting to the root of this. Because even though I couldn't figure out the strategy, I knew what it felt like. Because I had this experience. This is me 8 days after my daughters were born. I was 35 years old. 8 days before that, I had had a massive heart attack. Yeah, I know. So pregnant with twins, 35 years old, massive heart attack. I had open heart surgery and C-section on the same day. It's a crazy story, but it turns out well. So this is the first time that we held both babies at the same time. The NICU nurses took them out of the isolates and let us help them at the same time. And in that moment, I had everything I needed. That is the most content I had ever been. And I think when we talk about this happiness, that's hard to achieve, but content is possible. Because if you look closely, there are tubes and wires and all kinds of things going on over there. There also happens to be a newspaper reporter taking a picture, which is another layer of craziness that was going on then. But I had everything I needed. I had this little bubble of contentment when all of this chaos was swirling around us. So I know what this is supposed to feel like. A couple of days later, I'm in the NICU visiting the girls, and it is really, really loud. There's things beeping, there's babies crying, and I turn to my husband and I say, wow, it is really loud in here today. And he said, honey, it has been loud this whole time. You just didn't notice, because I was in that bubble of contentment. And of course, as we left the hospital and went into the real world, it was harder and harder to hold on to that bubble of contentment, but I figured out ways to do it. And I thought, aha, if that's what it feels like, and I know how to get there, what I need is data to figure out how to share that with the world. So I spent the last year and a half getting data. Now, I told you I had like a little geeky science girl thing going on. Where are my other geeky science people who love pie charts? Anybody? Oh, yeah. OK, so you're going to like this. Whew, that's good. So I went out and asked, what are the top stressors in the workplace? And we really looked at just job stress. Which little pie section color do you think relates to work-life balance? Just call it out. What color do you think it is? Red? It's blue. Yeah, I know. 7% of people said anything relating to work-life balance was their top stressor. Interestingly enough, the top stressor in that little section is my job is negatively affecting my health. Not life affecting work, but work affecting life. And I thought, okay, but that's everybody, right? If I switch it out and just look at the women, that should come out differently. Because we think that the assumption is women balancing work and home are going to be more stressed by that. 7% stayed exactly the same. I thought, okay, but let's look at women with children. That must make a difference, right? 7%. Now that work-life balance factor, however, went from my job is negatively affecting my health to caring for children, which makes sense. But still, only 7% of women with children under the age of 17 living at home said that that was their top stressor. Interestingly enough, men with children under 17 living at home said the same thing. Fascinating. So what that means to me is if we're treating stress with yoga at lunch, we're trying to solve the wrong problem. And in fact, 96% of people said something other than a work-life balance strategy would work to reduce their stress. I have to tell you, this just floored me. This was not the result that I anticipated. Now you're wondering yourself, what else, right? I'm going to tell you, don't worry. But the reason I put this yoga picture up is to remind me to tell you this story. Part of that study had open-ended questions. I always knew that a company was in trouble when those open-ended questions resulted in a book of responses, right? And this, and this, and this, and this, and this. For one organization, yoga at lunch was a stressor. It created a huge problem because only the people who were deemed not doing their work went to yoga at lunch, leaving the people who did do their work to cover the phones. Oh, they were mad. So my advice was, maybe yoga at lunch isn't such a great idea. So let's talk about what some of those other stressors are. The first major stressor was an uncertain future. In that wedge, that included worry about the national economy or change in regulations. I worked with a lot of healthcare organizations, so the changes in the way things are paid, way things are reported, way things are coded made a difference. Uncertainty about wages, layoffs, and then just organizational change. So that's what went into there. 18% of people said that that was their top stressor. Interestingly enough, 7% of people said that is never going to change. So when we asked them what would reduce your stress, they said, not going to change. It just is the way it is. 7% said improving the national economy and getting through the change would actually reduce their stress, which I thought was really interesting, especially that piece that says it's not going to change, it just is the way things are. The next major stressor is a negative environment. Sometimes these go hand in hand, and as I looked at companies, depending on what was going on, that uncertain future was much bigger, and hand in hand, this negative environment would get much bigger. Sometimes I'd look at a company and they didn't have any work-life balance worries at all. It was all uncertain future and negative environment, which is worrisome. So in there, your coworkers, a negative boss, communication style, a lack of teamwork, those sort of issues, negative environment. 7% of people said that that was their top stressor. What I found fascinating is that 30% of people said improving that would reduce their stress. I find that really interesting. So then, the next one is workload. The majority of this is around expectations of productivity or accuracy under times of change or low staffing. So doing more work with less staff, that sort of thing. It's also the fear of making a mistake or learning a new resource. In there, 68% of people said that that was their top stressor. And 45% of people said addressing that would reduce their stress. And again, 7% said it's just the way things are. Nothing's going to change. This was not what I expected to find. Again, 96% of people said something other than work-life balance would make a difference for them. So this creates several things at different levels. At an organizational level, a managerial level, and then at an individual level. First, at an organizational level, on the part of the survey that asks, how did your employer do reducing your stress and what could they do? A lot of what they said at an organizational level is that acknowledgement was important. Acknowledging the realities of what was going on. You know, are there layoffs? Is there some sort of change that's affecting the environment of stress in your organization? Acknowledging the impact of change on individual employees. And then making sure that employees that feel disconnected from the mission of the organization are recognized and valued in a way that they value. I thought those were interesting insights. On a managerial level, communication was the biggest key. That it was consistent and constant communication of the messages that were important. So I worked with information healthcare managers. And by far, this was their top stressor, that their computer systems and the way things were coded were changing, but yet they were still expected to have the same level of productivity and accuracy under this new system. And then when I talked to the managers, they said, but we told them it's going to take 3 months. It's okay, you have 3 months. But the employees didn't hear it. Much like when you have a marketing message and it takes 7 times before anybody acts on it, that sort of message has to be repeated over and over again in different ways, consistently and constantly, so it does soak in, so people do understand, okay, I can relax, I have 3 months. And one of the more fascinating trends that I've seen is an effort to leave work at work. So a company will say, okay, we're going to increase work-life balance, you need to leave work at work, which is a great idea. However, if it's not supported from the top down, it doesn't work. And I've seen this work really well in a couple of organizations. One which has 2 weeks that they just close the office. One over Christmas, one over the 4th of July week. And that is from the top down, that they're closing the office, and that makes sense. I talked to another group where they said, okay, don't answer your email after 7:00 p.m. or before 6 a.m., which is fine unless you have a manager that says, I expect my stuff to be answered even if I email you at 9 p.m., so there's a disconnect. So those are the sort of things I get in the book, right? And then on an individual level, there's some things, and that's really where my work comes in. And it's really about having people understand the importance of stress recovery. And sometimes it's really about getting through the crisis of urgency, because this sheer volume of all the work that we have to do, when you take it all together, everything seems as important as everything else. It's just this constant screaming for attention. But if we can stop, take a moment, look at everything, and then sort through priority, that can make a real difference. And then there are some situations where you can't change it. That 7% that says, this is never going to change. I worked with the Association of Women Lawyers. They just said, this is part of my job. It's just stressful all the time. In those situations, it's necessary to develop an emotional hazmat suit. Yeah. To equip yourself to just be able to function in a toxic environment. And this is me. This is a before and after. Standing off the bottom of our boat. That's a toxic environment. We go to great lengths to protect ourselves so we can function in that environment. And sometimes we need to equip our employees to be able to function in a stressful, toxic environment. I work with independent garden centers. They make all of their money in that spring planting season. It is full-on crazy for 3 months. They know that that's the case. They just need to protect themselves from the stress of that. So, in case you would like more geeky pie charts and more detail